Hey guys, so this video is a follow-up for one of a data-driven case study I did for as one of my interview process. And if you have watched the video I made earlier, this one might make more sense to you. Otherwise, you can treat it as an example of a business presentation. It could still be very helpful. And just for context, I did this data analysis as part of my interview process. And then after the team reviewed my work, I got into the next round. And for this particular round, I have to present my findings in around 10 minutes, I think. Also, for those of you who have any questions or thoughts, let me know in the comments and I'll try my best to answer. All right, so for this analysis, I picked the angle to identify where the core value was generated so we can focus the growth on that. Specifically, that comes down to this one question, which is what drives higher order volume? And the key finding in this analysis is that the value and growth is not evenly distributed. So over 70% of our order volume comes from just 20% of our restaurants and regions. And similar pattern also exists within our customers where the most frequent users, which is our power users, contribute to most of our total order volume. And when they use ASAP, they order more frequently and spend more comparing to the scheduled orders. And the key strategic imperative is to double down on what's working. So in the short term, that means investing in our top markets and merchants. And long term, we codify what works here to use as a proof into a playbook for geographic expansion into other regions. So for this whole analysis, I have three concrete recommendations to execute this, which I'm going to talk about in the later slides. Now, first, let's just dive into the data findings. And how does value distribution look like? Now, look at these two charts on the right-hand side. You can see that on the restaurant side, just 15 merchants, which is 24% of our total, drive 70% of the total order volume. And over the geographic side, 5 regions, which is 21% of our total market, account for 70% of the total order volume, which shows that the value and growth is more concentrated. And that concentration represents both our biggest opportunity as well as the risk. And why it matters is because if we can figure out why these partners or markets are winning, we can replicate that success factor elsewhere. But first, we need to protect and accelerate what's already working. Like that's the foundation of this whole strategy. Now, knowing what the concentration is and that exists, we want to see where these things are happening, which makes the market actually, which markets are actually driving this. Now, this slide shows the top 5 markets in more detail. And San Francisco is our top one engine, the most mature market, leading in both the order value at 115K volume with roughly 3,600 orders. And Scranton and Orange County are our top tier 2 high growth markets, which are scaling fast and contributing to significant revenue. And then in terms of Dallas and San Antonio are tier 3. They're emergent powerhouses. They're smaller, but also showing strong potential. So these markets are more than just revenue centers for DoorDash. They're also part of the proof points for our growth model. Like all our strategies are succeeding here. For example, merchant density, customer dynamics, partner mix should all be codified and reinvested. And once we crack these codes into these 5 markets, we can have a repeatable playbook for any city with similar demographics and geography. Now, moving on to the next slide. So after the market view, let's talk about customers. So we see very similar concentration pattern. Very small group of high frequency users drive the majority of our order value, and these are our power users. Retaining these group is very crucial. So here's what's really interesting. Another analysis of the order type reveals that ASAP orders dominate. So they account for nearly all revenue and have more than just double the repeat rate comparing to scheduled orders, which is 32% versus 13%. And this tells us something about the customer behavior because when people are not planning ahead, it drives both higher spend and more frequent orders. So do the growth. And the growth depends on 2 things and winning and retaining power users as well as encouraging ASAP orders. And if we can do both, we unlock significant revenue and loyalty gains. Now move to the next slide, which is the most important one, strategic recommendations. We have three things we want to do here, depending on based on the insights we mentioned earlier. Like what do we actually want to do with these insights? So the first one is a Power Partner Program, and our goal is to double down on the top performing restaurants. In this pilot, we focus on San Francisco and assign dedicated account managements to our top merchants. We give them a simple performance dashboards and a 500 marketing credits to help them boost visibility on our platform. And then success looks like this. So 10% lift in gross merchant volume and 5% increase in repeat customers. And this is measured against the control group, which is something we keep everything as it is. And then the second initiative is regional growth teams. So for this one, we'll put additional business development resource to establish a small agile teams in our top markets in order to accelerate merchant acquisition. And for that, we'll target the top 10 high performing restaurants that are not yet on our platform and test on local market channels like partnerships with food bloggers, for example. And how do we identify these top 10 high performing restaurants? We can check the Google review, we can check Yelp, to get some both quantitative and qualitative information, and then we consolidate those things to kind of identify what is the top 10 that's not yet on our platform. And then we measure the success by comparing the test group's merchant acquisition rate to a control market like Dallas to see if the merchant growth increase is significant. And if this turned out to be successful, this can become our market growth playbook, which is like a repeatable model for geographic expansion. And then lastly, we want to maximize the power user value. And this initiative is less of a priority comparing with the previous two because it's further from the North Star metrics we want to move. And the goal here is to drive engagement with higher value customers, encourage ASAP adoption. So I'm proposing an A/B test. Basically, one group gets a 20% upsell discount and something like a checkout banner that reinforces the value in terms of a speed. So something like get your order in 25 minutes. And the control group see our standard workflow. And essentially, we want to compare the results from these two groups over some certain time period. And we'll set the success around 15% increase in power user order frequency, as well as a 5% lift in ASAP selection. And obviously, we don't want to see any drop in cart conversion. So that'll be something to monitor as well. And then moving on to the next slide, which is the last one. So in terms of our risk mitigations and next steps, that's associated with this action plan. And first one, so there are three things. First one is Dasher supply constraints. So everything we talked so far, especially the actionable steps, are aiming to increase our demand. So if we're accelerating the order volume in concentrated markets or merchants, we might outpace our driver supply, which means like the supply and demand is just kind of off. Like there could be a gap here. And how we mitigate is that we phrase rollouts carefully and then we monitor supplies in real time. And the demand growth and driver acquisition needs to stay in sync. Like that's pretty crucial. And then secondly, it's the long tail merchant alienation, which can be a potential risk because if we allocate too much resource on the top performance, not only on the merchant but also the region, we might risk neglecting smaller merchants. So in order to address that, we have to treat it as an additional investment, not like a current resource reallocation. So we still remain the automated support for all partners and just giving extra resource to our winners. And then lastly, in terms of geographic expansion slowdown, which is more like a consideration. So concentration on current market might delay entry into new cities. And how we mitigate is like, this is something actually more strategic. It's more like a consideration. So we're securing our revenue base first, and then we're funding smarter expansion with proven playbooks. Essentially take baby steps instead of just change everything all at once. And then closely monitor what's going on, all the related metrics before we move on to the next. And in terms of a next step, there are two areas I want to analyze further. And the first one is merchant category performance. Just because for this analysis, in terms of a data set, it's like pretty surface level, I would say. We don't have the granular level detail in breaking down the result by cuisine type. That's just one example, such as like Chinese, Japanese, Greek, comfort food. Those are the different categories to kind of identify what are the high potential verticals in each of these categories and who are the winners in each of these verticals, and what do we do about that. And the second analysis I could be doing is like more something that with more dimension beyond just GMV, just gross merchant value. So looking at other operational metrics such as refund rates, prep times, and ratings to spot any future high performance earlier. Like we want to do either like an average or like using some proxies to kind of measure how well these performance are doing, how well each of these players in these categories are doing, so we can better identify the top performance. So that's all for this analysis, and I'm happy to address any follow-up questions.